We all know that religion is a powerful force. It shapes entire cultures, guides people's actions, and even influences nations. But how exactly does it reach into the everyday choices we make, like what we eat, what we wear, and how we carry ourselves in daily life? What's fascinating is that these seemingly simple, routine things, our meals, our clothing, our behavior, can be deeply connected to something much larger, something that gives meaning to our lives, something that has shaped human history for thousands of years. Let's start with food. Eating is one of the most basic human needs, but when you think about it, what we choose to eat and how we prepare it is anything but simple. For millions of people around the world, religion plays a huge role in these decisions. Take Judaism as an example. Jewish dietary laws known as kashrut outline strict rules about what can and cannot be eaten, how food should be prepared, and even how it should be consumed. These rules aren't just guidelines, they're an integral part of Jewish identity and religious observance. Choosing to eat kosher isn't just about following rules, it's about connecting to a tradition that goes back centuries, a way of aligning one's life with divine commandments. Islam has its own set of dietary laws known as halal, which many Muslims adhere to. These rules focus on cleanliness, ethical treatment of animals, and specific prohibitions, like the avoidance of pork and alcohol. But it's not just about avoiding certain foods. For Muslims, food preparation and consumption are acts of worship. During Ramadan, fasting from sunrise to sunset is more than just refraining from eating or drinking. It's about self-discipline, empathy for the poor, and spiritual reflection. It's a physical manifestation of faith, where hunger serves a higher purpose, reminding believers of their connection to God and their responsibilities to others.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound spiritual lesson.
Even in Hinduism, food is treated as something sacred. Many Hindus follow a vegetarian diet, rooted in the principle of ahimsa, or non-violence. The idea is simple. By not consuming animals, they avoid harming living beings. But this practice is more than just ethical, it's spiritual. In many ways, the food they eat becomes a statement of respect for life in all its forms. This belief has a ripple effect, influencing how Hindus think about the world and their place in it. When you start seeing food as part of a larger system of respect and reverence for life, it changes the way you engage with the world. But what about those who don't follow a particular faith? Can the way religious people approach food teach something to the rest of us? Consider this: in a world where fast food is ubiquitous and convenience often takes precedence over thoughtfulness, religious dietary laws force people to slow down, to be mindful of what they consume. It's a counterweight to the speed and carelessness with which many of us approach our meals today. Maybe there's something valuable in taking a more thoughtful approach to what we eat, regardless of our personal beliefs. Now let's talk about clothing. At first glance, what we wear might not seem like a big deal. After all, clothes are just a way to cover ourselves and express personal style, right? Well, not quite. In many religious traditions, clothing holds a deeper significance. It's not just about fashion or function, it's about identity, modesty, and morality. Take Islam, for example. Many Muslim women choose to wear the hijab, a headscarf that covers the hair and neck. For some, it's a personal choice, a way of expressing their faith, modesty, and commitment to God. For others, it's a cultural expectation. But what's important to understand is that for many women, the hijab is a powerful symbol of autonomy and identity. It's a statement that says, I am in control, of how I present myself to the world. And I am guided by my faith in making that decision. In the Sikh religion, both men and women wear specific articles of clothing like the turban, which have deep religious significance. The turban is not just a piece of cloth, it's a symbol of equality, honor, and dedication to their faith. It's a reminder of their values and what they stand for. The same goes for the kara, a steel bracelet that Sikhs wear, symbolizing eternity and the interconnectedness of all things. These symbols aren't just about outward appearance, they're about reminding the wearer of their duties and responsibilities as a Sikh. It's fascinating how something as simple as a piece of clothing can carry such profound meaning. Judaism also has its own traditions when it comes to clothing. Orthodox Jewish men wear a kippah or yarmulke, a small skull cap, to remind themselves of God's presence at all times. It's a simple gesture, but one that carries a lot of weight. By wearing the kippah, they're constantly reminded of their relationship with God. It's a way of keeping their faith at the forefront of their daily lives, even in the midst of mundane activities. Now let's move on to behavior. This is where things get even more interesting because behavior is where the internal meets the external. All of us, whether religious or not, are shaped by rules and expectations. But for those who follow a religion, these rules often come from a higher source. For many people, their behavior is guided by religious teachings that tell them how to treat others, how to live a good life, and how to make moral choices. In Christianity, for instance, the teachings of Jesus emphasize compassion, forgiveness, and love for one's neighbor. These aren't just abstract ideas, they're meant to be put into practice in everyday life. The idea is that by following these principles, a person can live a life that reflects the love of God. It's not about being perfect, it's about striving to be better in how you interact with others. The golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, is a guiding principle that has shaped the behavior of millions of Christians for centuries. In Buddhism, behavior is closely tied to the concept of karma, the idea that your actions have consequences, not just in this life but in future ones. The goal is to live in a way that minimizes harm to others and maximizes compassion and kindness. It's not just about following a set of rules, it's about transforming your mind and heart so that you naturally act in ways that are beneficial to others. Islam also provides clear guidance on behavior, with the 5 pillars serving as a foundation for how Muslims live their lives. These pillars, faith, prayer, charity, fasting, and pilgrimage, are not just religious duties, they're a way of structuring life around devotion to God and service to others. But what about those who don't follow a religious tradition? What role does behavior play in their lives? Here's something to consider. Many of the values that guide religious behavior, kindness, fairness, respect, are universal. They're not exclusive to any one faith. So even if you don't follow a specific religion, there's still something to learn from the way religious people approach their actions. Maybe it's about being more intentional, more thoughtful in how we treat others. Maybe it's about realizing that our actions have consequences, not just for ourselves, but for the people around us. To sum it up, whether it's through what we eat, what we wear, or how we behave, religion has a profound impact on our lives. It shapes our identity, our sense of purpose, and even the smallest decisions we make each day. And while the specific practices vary from one religion to another, the underlying principle is often the same. Our actions, no matter how small, are connected to something much bigger than ourselves. Let's get deeper into how religious influence on behavior doesn't just stop at the obvious rules or codes of conduct. It seeps into the subtleties of how we think and feel about everything, from how we see ourselves to how we interact with the world around us. It's not just about praying, fasting, or giving to charity. Religion often draws an invisible line between what we deem acceptable and what we reject, what we pursue and what we avoid, shaping an entire worldview that can be hard to detach from even if we don't consciously think about it every day. Take the concept of guilt or shame, for example. In many religious traditions, guilt is tied to the idea of sin. Christianity, for instance, speaks of original sin, which suggests that humans are inherently flawed and must seek redemption. This isn't just a religious doctrine, it's a framework that can shape how we see ourselves on a psychological level. If you grow up with the belief that you are fundamentally sinful, it might influence how you approach decisions, relationships, or even your own self-worth. You might constantly seek forgiveness, not just from God but from others around you, or you could develop a heightened sense of responsibility for your actions. But guilt isn't always negative. In some cases, it can be a moral compass that keeps us in check. If we believe that we are accountable to a higher power, we might think twice before acting selfishly or hurting others. This sense of accountability can be incredibly powerful. It's like having a moral referee constantly reminding us to be better, to make choices that align with our values. In Islam, the idea of taqwa, a sense of God consciousness, is similar. It's the feeling that God is always watching, and therefore we should always strive to do what is right. It's not about fear, but about respect and reverence. The idea is that the more mindful you are of God's presence, the more likely you are to make decisions that reflect your faith. This mindfulness becomes a way of life, influencing not just big decisions but everyday interactions, how you speak to others, how you conduct business, how you handle adversity. But here's something to really think about. How much of our behavior is shaped by the fear of consequences, whether divine or worldly, and how much is shaped by a genuine desire to do good, to live in a way that aligns with our highest ideals? This is where things get complex because religion often plays on both motivations. On one hand, there's the promise of reward or punishment, heaven or hell, karma or reincarnation. On the other hand, there's the ideal of living a virtuous life for its own sake, because it's the right thing to do. In Buddhism, behavior is closely tied to the concept of karma, the idea that your actions have consequences, not just in this life but in future ones. The goal is to live in a way that minimizes harm to others and maximizes compassion and kindness. It's not just about following a set of rules, it's about transforming your mind and heart so that you naturally act in ways that are beneficial to others. Islam also provides clear guidance on behavior, with the 5 pillars serving as a foundation for how Muslims live their lives. These pillars, faith, prayer, charity, fasting, and pilgrimage, are not just religious duties, they're a way of structuring life around devotion to God and service to others. Then there's Hinduism, which teaches the concept of dharma, a moral and spiritual duty to live in accordance with truth and righteousness. The idea here is that each person has a unique role to play in the universe, and by fulfilling that role, they contribute to the greater good. This sense of duty can be incredibly empowering. It says you have a purpose, and fulfilling that purpose is not just good for you, it's good for the whole world. Imagine how different life would feel if we all saw our actions as part of some grander scheme, as contributing to something larger than ourselves. But here's where things can get tricky. Many religious traditions also draw distinct boundaries between who is considered part of the in-group and who is not. These divisions can influence behavior in ways that aren't always positive. We see this in the way certain religious groups might treat outsiders or those who don't share their beliefs. Whether it's subtle exclusion or overt discrimination, religion can sometimes create divisions that lead to judgment or even hostility. This is where the same principles that encourage compassion and ethical behavior toward one's own can turn into barriers that prevent people from seeing the humanity in others. And it's not just about how we treat outsiders. Religion can also deeply influence how we view ourselves, sometimes in ways that are empowering, but other times in ways that can be limiting. For instance, many religious traditions emphasize humility, which can be a beautiful thing, encouraging people to put others first, to avoid arrogance, and to recognize their place within a larger community. But taken to an extreme, humility can sometimes turn into self-doubt or self-neglect. If we're constantly told to be humble, we might start to feel like we don't deserve success or happiness, or that we should always put others' needs before our own, even to our own detriment. In contrast, other religious teachings might emphasize personal empowerment and self-actualization. In certain branches of New Age spirituality, or even in some forms of Christianity, the focus is on becoming the best version of yourself, on manifesting your potential and living a life that reflects your divine purpose. This kind of teaching can be incredibly motivating, pushing people to strive for greatness, to believe in their own power to change their circumstances or even the world. But think about this: how do we balance these two ideas? How do we reconcile the need for humility with the desire for self-empowerment? How do we navigate the tension between serving others and fulfilling our own potential? Religion often tries to offer an answer, but the truth is, it's a balancing act that each of us has to figure out for ourselves, guided by our experiences, our beliefs, and our understanding of the world. There's also the question of how religious behavior changes over time. What happens when the world modernizes, when traditions that once made sense in a specific cultural or historical context no longer seem to fit? This is something many people wrestle with today. Some argue that religious teachings are timeless and should be followed to the letter, no matter how much society changes. Others believe that religion needs to evolve, that its teachings should be interpreted in light of new knowledge, new challenges, and new ways of thinking. For instance, take the debate within some branches of Christianity over issues like gender roles or legality rights. Traditional teachings might hold one view, but modern interpretations increasingly challenge those views, arguing that the core message of love and compassion should take precedence over age-old doctrines. Similarly, in Islam, some modern scholars advocate for a reinterpretation of certain practices, suggesting that the spirit of the law is more important than the letter of it. They argue that as society evolves, so too should our understanding of religious teachings. But not everyone agrees. For many, the idea of changing religious practices is seen as a slippery slope, a dilution of what makes their faith unique and sacred. They believe that the beauty of religion lies in its constancy, the idea that no matter how much the world around us changes, these core truths remain the same. And there's something to be said for that. In a world that feels increasingly chaotic and uncertain, religion can offer a sense of stability, a touchstone that anchors people in something unchanging. So where does that leave us? The influence of religion on what we eat, wear, and how we behave is undeniable. It shapes not just our external actions, but our internal landscapes, our thoughts, our feelings, our very sense of who we are. It connects us to traditions that are thousands of years old, but it also forces us to confront the challenges of living in a modern world. We might not always be aware of it, but these invisible threads, woven by centuries of belief, practice, and ritual, still tug at us, shaping our choices, guiding our steps, and defining our place in the world. Whether we choose to follow those threads or cut them loose is, ultimately, up to each of us. But no matter what, the influence of religion on our lives is something we can't ignore. It's in the food we eat, the clothes we wear, and the way we treat ourselves and others. And it will continue to be for as long as we look for meaning in the world around us. Religion's impact on our lives runs so deep that even people who don't actively practice a faith are often shaped by its influence. We might not always recognize it, but many of our moral frameworks, social norms, and even personal habits have roots in religious traditions that go back centuries. This influence is subtle but ever-present, guiding decisions in ways that can be hard to trace. So what happens when we start to question or move away from these religious frameworks? Do these influences disappear, or do they simply take on new forms? Let's explore how religious traditions and values often persist, even in secular societies. Take, for example, the concept of charity. In many religious teachings, giving to others is not just encouraged, it's required. Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, and Buddhism all emphasize the importance of helping those in need. In Islam, zakat, the practice of giving a portion of one's wealth to charity, is one of the 5 pillars of the faith. For Christians, giving alms is seen as a way of following Jesus' example of love and compassion. Judaism also emphasizes tzedakah, a form of charity that is seen as a moral obligation. But even in societies where religious observance has declined, the value of charity remains strong. Secular organizations and movements that focus on social justice and humanitarian aid often draw on these same principles. The language may change, the focus may shift from divine duty to human rights, but the underlying values of compassion, generosity, and a sense of responsibility for others are still there. It's as if the religious roots of these practices are still holding strong, even when the religious structures themselves have loosened their grip. Think about how many of our societal norms around fairness, justice, and equality have similar religious origins. The idea that all human beings have inherent worth, that we should treat others with dignity and respect, is central to many religious teachings. In Christianity, this idea is rooted in the belief that all people are created in the image of God. In Buddhism, it's tied to the principle of metta, or loving kindness, which teaches that we should extend compassion to all beings, regardless of who they are or where they come from. Even in secular societies, these values persist. They've become part of the fabric of how we think about human rights and social justice. The modern push for equality, for example, often mirrors the religious pursuit of treating others with fairness and respect. But here's where things get interesting. As religious observance declines in some parts of the world, these values are increasingly framed in non-religious terms. They're seen as universal human principles, rather than commandments from a higher power. This raises a fundamental question: are these values truly universal, or are they the remnants of religious teachings that have been repackaged for a secular age? And if they are remnants, what happens when the religious framework that once supported them fades further into the background? Do these values still hold the same weight? Let's shift our focus to the idea of rituals. One of the most powerful ways religion influences our lives is through rituals, those repeated actions that give structure and meaning to our days, weeks, and years. Whether it's attending a religious service, lighting candles, fasting during certain times of the year, or even saying a prayer before meals, Rituals create a rhythm in life that can bring comfort and stability. They offer a way to connect with something larger than ourselves, to mark time in a meaningful way. But what happens when people leave religion behind? Do they abandon rituals altogether, or do they create new ones? Interestingly, many people who no longer identify with a particular faith still hold on to certain rituals, even if they don't think of them as religious anymore. For example, someone might not go to church on Sundays, but they might still gather with family for Sunday dinner. They might not pray before meals, but they might take a moment of silence to show gratitude for the food. These new rituals serve much the same purpose as the old ones. They create moments of reflection, connection, and meaning. In fact, we're seeing the rise of secular rituals in many parts of the world. People are creating their own traditions around things like mindfulness, meditation, and even exercise. Yoga, for instance, has its roots in Hinduism and Buddhism, but today it's often practiced in completely secular settings as a way to connect body and mind. Similarly, the practice of mindfulness, rooted in Buddhist meditation traditions, has been widely adopted as a tool for mental well-being, with little or no reference to its religious origins. These modern rituals may not involve worshiping a deity, but they still serve the same basic human need for structure, reflection, and meaning. They remind us that even when we move away from formal religious practice, the impulse to create rituals doesn't disappear. It simply adapts to new contexts. Here's another way to think about it. Religion often provides a framework for dealing with life's biggest questions about meaning, purpose, suffering, and death. But what happens when people step outside of that framework? Do they stop asking those questions, or do they find new ways to search for answers? Many people who don't practice a religion still find themselves grappling with these existential questions. They might turn to philosophy, science, or even art for answers. Some might develop personal spiritual practices that are not tied to any particular faith tradition. For instance, someone might find meaning in the idea of the interconnectedness of all life, drawing on concepts from both science and spirituality without adhering to any formal religion. Even in secular contexts, people often find themselves drawn to ideas and practices that help them make sense of the world. They might not believe in God, but they might believe in the importance of community, of kindness, of living a life that has meaning. In a way, these secular beliefs can serve much the same purpose as religious ones. They give people a sense of direction, a way to navigate the complexities of life. But this brings us to an interesting point. If many people are still searching for meaning, purpose, and connection, whether through secular or spiritual means, does that suggest that the human need for these things is universal? Is there something about being human that makes us naturally inclined to seek out these kinds of answers, whether through religion or not? Another area where religion's influence is often overlooked is in our understanding of time. Many religious traditions have their own calendars marking time through festivals, holy days, and rituals. These calendars often reflect the rhythms of the natural world, harvests, solstices, and the changing of the seasons. In Judaism, for example, the holidays of Passover and Sukkot are tied to the agricultural cycle, while in Christianity, Easter is linked to the spring equinox. Even in secular societies, time is often structured around religious holidays, whether people recognize it or not. In many Western countries, the workweek and school calendar are still shaped by the Christian tradition, with weekends off for rest, originally tied to the Sabbath, and major holidays like Christmas and Easter observed nationwide, even by those who don't celebrate them in a religious sense. But beyond the practical aspects of time, religion also influences how we think about the passage of time in a more philosophical sense. Many religions teach that time is cyclical, with life, death, and rebirth forming an endless loop. Others view time as linear, with a clear beginning and end, creation, life, and an eventual final judgment or afterlife. These different views of time can shape how people approach their lives. If you believe that life is a one-time opportunity, you might live with a sense of urgency, trying to make the most of every moment. If you believe in reincarnation, you might approach life with more patience, seeing it as just one step in a much longer journey. Even for those who don't subscribe to a particular religious view of time, these ideas can still influence how we think about the future, about legacy, and about what it means to live a good life. In a world that often feels chaotic and uncertain, many people, religious or not, are still looking for ways to make sense of time, to find meaning in both the everyday moments and the bigger arc of their lives.